Hello to all my students. I am Dr. Utsav Bansal, Marrow Ophthalmology faculty, and we are doing this session for the NEET PG Recall 2021 questions. Yes, we know that finally the NEET PG paper happened and the reviews were mixed. Mixed not because some found it easy and some found it difficult. Mixed because it was surely an easy paper as every student has come across. But it had a mixed bag of questions in the form of long stem clinical questions also. So this probably gave us a window into the coming examinations, into the coming pattern moving till next everybody. Yes, ophthalmology had 10 to 12 questions asked, which is the norm from ophthalmology. So no new surprises there, guys. Now, before we start doing our NEET PG recall questions, I would just like to say that we are not doing this session to get to know the correct answers. We are doing this session to have some progression. We have to strive for progression and not perfection. We cannot solve each and every question in the exam. But each day when we study, we are trying to progress. We are trying to make ourselves better in order to reach the goal. The goal should be to be the best, to get the rank 1 in the country. Yes. Now, why are we discussing these questions? We are discussing these questions, everybody, because these are the more common topics asked. As we know, the trends continue in the examination. So we know that such questions or similar topics may be asked in the upcoming examinations also. Everybody, looking at the screen, if we see what was the division of the questions from ophthalmology, there were 2 questions which are asked from neuro-ophthalmology, albeit easy ones, everybody. So neuro-ophthalmology, as always said, is an important topic. 2 questions from retina. Retina has always been asked, more so in INI-SET or AIIMS, but now also in NEET exam for all of you. 1 question from conjunctiva, almost always asked. 1 question from trauma to the eye, almost always asked. 1 question from cornea, which was related to the basics of the eye. It was a biochemistry-based question on cornea. 2 questions from glaucoma, anti-glaucoma drugs. Almost always in every exam, you will see 1 question getting asked. 1 question from optics. You will see it was probably one of those controversial questions which a lot of students are divided upon. And 1 question from eyelid or embryology. This was one of the ectopic questions per se that is usually asked from ophthalmology. 1 ectopic or 2 ectopic questions, which we probably don't expect going forward, everybody. Yes? Now, let's start our discussion of NEET PG recall questions, starting with question number 1, everybody. A contact lens user. So the first keyword in such history-based questions is to be able to understand what the examiner is trying to ask. So the examiner has said a contact lens user, that is a very important clue here, presents with the following clinical picture. So this is the clinical picture, everybody. So now in the clinical picture, what are we able to see? We are able to see that the upper eyelid is everted, everybody. Everted upper eyelid. In the everted upper lid, we are able to see the conjunctival reaction. Now, from our basics, we understand that conjunctival reaction can be of 2 types. Either it can be a papilla or it can be a follicle. So the question is, what is this? Are these whitish dots, everybody? No. Whitish lesions, lymphoid aggregates are follicles. These are reddish raised lesions. So reddish raised lesions, as we all know, I hope, are called as papilla. Right, guys? So we are talking about papilla here, everybody. Now, he has watering, redness and foreign body sensation. So these are his symptoms, everybody. For the past 2 months, what is the probable diagnosis? This is what the examiner has asked all of us, right, guys? Now, how would I have approached this question, or how should you approach this question? As soon as I see papilla in the photograph, I read the option B, it goes out, follicular conjunctivitis. It cannot be follicular because it is papillary here, everybody. Then I read trachoma. Trachoma, I know, is caused by chlamydia, and in trachoma, we characteristically see what, everybody? Sago grain follicles. That is the characteristic sign. So again, everybody, trachoma gets ruled out. Yes. So as soon as I see the photograph and I know they are papilla, 2 options get ruled out and I am left with only 2 other options, everybody. What are the 2 options that I am left with? Giant papillary conjunctivitis, or in abbreviation I am writing GPC, or spring catarrh, also known as vernal keratoconjunctivitis, VKC. Now comes your contact lens word, everybody. If a patient is wearing contact lens, then which condition is more likely? Giant papillary conjunctivitis or spring catarrh? I hope you know, yes. The answer has to be giant papillary conjunctivitis and not spring catarrh. But again, a lot of you may be wondering why, sir, it looks like a cobblestone. So let's see, everybody, how to differentiate between GPC and VKC on a photograph, as well as what are the clues in the question which will help you differentiate between a GPC or a VKC, everybody. So let's see these two photographs. Now, what do we see, everybody? We see in this photograph papilla. But in the second photograph also we see papilla. But if we see these papillas, everybody, let's see this papilla, let's see this papilla, let's see this papilla. These papilla are greater than 1 mm in diameter. So they are giant papilla. And that is why the name to this condition given becomes what, everybody? GPC. But here the papilla are smaller, everybody, and that is why cobblestoning or smaller papilla, that is why we will call it VKC. But I can understand, a lot of you are saying, sir, how to differentiate? The size was not written. Okay, but then the clues in the question are important. VKC, everybody, as a condition occurs in which age group? 5 to 15 years of age. Has the age been given in the question? No. Then, everybody, it is seen in summers and spring, everybody. That is the classic season. Has the season been given, everybody? No. Then, everybody, it is the itching part which is the main complaint. Then, everybody, there is the ropey discharge which is the complaint. Has the patient complained of any itching or ropey discharge? No. If we see the question, the patient is complained of watering and foreign body sensation. Now, let's come to GPC. Why does GPC occur? GPC occurs due to mechanical, that is the word we always remember, everybody. Due to mechanical irritation. Yes. So the classic examples we read are: number 1, contact lens. If you are wearing a contact lens and the contact lens edge is touching your upper eyelid, whenever you are blinking, there is scratching or there is friction which is occurring, everybody, that is mechanically irritating my upper eyelid. That is what is leading to giant papilla. Or, everybody, if after any surgery there are sutures and the knots are protruding. Or, everybody, if there is any ill-fitting prosthesis, or I'm saying prosthetic eye. So all of us know that these are the important clues to a question in giant papillary conjunctivitis. So I hope we are crystal clear about the question. If we again go to the question had contact lens, the question had watering, redness and foreign body sensation in the eye for the past 2 months, which is a clear-cut diagnosis towards GPC. None of the clues that should have been present in VKC are present. Okay. If you want to know VKC, everybody, what are the other important signs that could have been seen in a case of VKC, everybody? As we see on the screen, everybody, here. What is this, everybody? At the limbus. At the limbus, we are able to see some deposits, everybody. So these are what, everybody? Eosinophilic deposits at the limbus. And I hope all of you know the name. What is the name, everybody? Yes, I can hear you saying Horner Trantas dots. Okay. And then the last, everybody, we see a pseudogerontoxon. Pseudogerontoxon, everybody, looks like Arcus senilis. This white colored ring between my two arrows that I am drawing looks like Arcus senilis. So it is usually present in old age, but here we see it in a child or a young age, basically, because it is VKC 5 to 15 years. So that is why it is called as pseudogerontoxon. Looks like Arcus senilis, but it is actually not Arcus senilis. Okay, everybody. So that's our question number 1. The answer is giant papillary conjunctivitis without any doubt, everybody. Yes. Let's move on to the next question, everybody. So the second question says a 2-month-old infant. So the first clue in the question is the age, 2 months. Was brought by his mother with complaints of inability to open the eyes in light. Inability to open the eyes in light indicates photophobia and excessive watering. Watering basically means lacrimation. So the age and the symptoms in the question. The clinical picture is given below. What is the diagnosis? So what is the picture that is given to us? We see that in the left eye, what is there, everybody? In the left eye, there is corneal haze. Yes, this is clearly visible to us. Plus, if we have seen such photographs, we also know that this is a case of Boophthalmos. Boophthalmos means enlarged eye. The corneal diameter is increased. Yes, we can make this out if we ever seen this photograph. Yes. So if we have read this topic, if we have seen such photographs, then the answer is direct and clear, everybody. What has to be the answer, everybody? Blue eyes, hypnotize. I always sing this song. The answer has to be congenital glaucoma. But if we don't know this answer straight away, then what is the other way to rule out the other options and solve this? Everybody, I read the first option. Ophthalmia neonator. Is this the right answer? No. Why, everybody? Ophthalmia neonatorum is what, everybody? Ophthalmia neonatorum is conjunctivitis in neonates. Conjunctivitis means what, everybody? The child should have had some discharge, everybody. Yes. Should not have been able to open the eyes. The eye should have been sticky, everybody. Nothing like that seen. Also, this is conjunctivitis in a neonate. Neonate means less than 1 month. Less than 28 days. The age here is 2 months, everybody. Both the clues are good enough to rule out ophthalmia neonatorum. Can it be cataract, everybody? No, it cannot be cataract. Why it cannot be cataract? Cataract is opacity in the lens, not the opacity in the cornea. So, if we don't know ophthalmology, what is this, everybody? This is my cornea. My cornea is hazy because I can see the haziness from limbus to limbus, everybody. If it would have been cataract, I would have been able to see a rim of iris, everybody. Yes or no? Pupillary margin, I would have been able to see, everybody. Whether the pupil was dilated or constricted, I would have been able to see some iris. And in between, in the center of the iris, through the pupil, I would have been able to see the opacity. So we know that both these are not the answers. If both these are not the answers, then you're left with only two options, congenital glaucoma and mucopolysaccharidosis. Common sense says goes with congenital glaucoma, but if you still wanted to go with mucopolysaccharidosis, let's see, everybody, why. So we should know, or we do know, everybody, that these are the causes of corneal opacification in a child, usually starting in the neonate age. Yes. So the first cause is mucopolysaccharidosis. The second cause is CHED1 or 2. That means congenital hereditary endothelial dystrophy. Then G for glaucoma, congenital glaucoma. S for sclerocornea. R for rubella infection. And T for trauma. These are some of the causes of corneal opacification. Now, if we want to argue why this is not a case of MPS, everybody, first let us see why it is a case of congenital glaucoma, everybody. So I look at this, everybody. Congenital glaucoma presents with 3 symptoms, as we all know. Let's see. The first symptom is blepharospasm. B, photophobia. P, and lacrimation. L. This is the classic triad, everybody. Yes or no? We know this, BPL. Then, what is the earliest sign, everybody? The earliest sign is hazy cornea. Again, we know this. Then, we can also see some Hauptstripe, which we were not able to see in the given photograph, and boophthalmos. Boophthalmos means enlarged eye, everybody. Yes, the corneal diameter becomes greater than 13 mm. So, looking at the question, we are satisfied with the options as far as photophobia and lacrimation are concerned in the history. We know there is hazy cornea, we know there is boophthalmos. So, everything together is good enough to be able to diagnose a case of congenital glaucoma. But why it could not have been mucopolysaccharidosis? Let's see. So, everybody, mucopolysaccharidosis or MPS. Let's see the ocular manifestations of mucopolysaccharidosis. First of all, we should know that ocular manifestations are more common in MPS 1, MPS 6 and MPS 7. In all these MPSs, the major thing that we see is corneal clouding, or I can say hazy cornea, which is seen in the photograph. But this usually presents after, or I can say around 4 months of age. And this is very slowly progressive. So the kind of opacity that you see, which is a completely hazy cornea, that will not be able to develop by 2 months of age. It is a slowly progressive case. So first of all, we see some haziness, then it increases. So there is actually a grading, 4 grades of haziness, everybody. Yes. So complete haziness will not be able to occur in 2 months of age. That's the first clue. Everybody. Secondly, retinopathy occurs in this. So retinopathy presents in the form of retinal degeneration. Then glaucoma can also occur, secondary open angle glaucoma, and then optic nerve abnormalities, that is optic atrophy. So as we see, they can present with a lot of abnormalities in the eye. Yes, and not only haziness of the cornea. If itself you focus also on the corneal clouding, please remember MPS themselves are a very rare group of disorders. The incidence is 1 in 1 lakh or something like that, everybody. I hope we understand this. So in such questions, we should try and go with the more common answer rather than thinking too much, everybody. That is one thing that we do, overthink. If such a patient came in my OPD, what will be the differential diagnosis I will form? In differential diagnosis, what will be the first thing I will write, everybody? I will write congenital glaucoma. Unless I can rule out congenital glaucoma, I will not move on to my second or third differential diagnosis. So again, that is a clinical based scenario. So you need to think like a clinician that if such a patient is walking into your clinic, how will you approach this case and what will be the most likely diagnosis here? Am I clear? So that is question 2. The answer is congenital glaucoma. Mucopolysaccharidosis cannot be the answer in such a question. Everybody, moving on to the third question now. So this was one of those ectopic questions, not an expected question in terms of the topic that was asked, but still an easy question, everybody. What is the most common complication associated with the following abnormality? So absolutely an image-based question if we call it, yes. So what is the abnormality? We see the upper eyelid, everybody. In the upper eyelid, we see a defect, everybody. So we see basically, I can say, a full thickness defect in upper lid. And when there is a full thickness defect, we call it what, everybody? Coloboma. Yes. Coloboma is an developmental abnormality which occurs due to inability of the fetal fissure to close by 6th to 7th week of gestation, everybody. Yes. Now, coloboma can occur in lots of parts, everybody. Coloboma can occur in iris, it can occur in lens, it can occur in choroid, it can occur in retina, optic nerve, everywhere. We know this, yes. So this is a case of eyelid coloboma as visible to us on screen. Now, if we were able to at least know this, or even if we didn't know this, just by looking at the photograph, if we were able to apply common sense, we could have been able to answer the question. Because of the notch in the upper eyelid, when the patient will close the eye, why do we close the eye? We close the eye so that our ocular surface gets covered. So this acts like basically a window over the eye. So there is a defect in the window, everybody. Yes. So due to this, whenever the patient even closes the eye, the cornea will be exposed, everybody. Because the cornea will be exposed, it will be exposed to dust, dirt and all the other pathogens, everybody around. Yes. So basically, due to the constant exposure of the cornea will land up in what, everybody? Exposure keratopathy. Yes. Is this condition related to diplopia? No, everybody. There is no squint, everybody, here. So no diplopia here. There is no double vision here, everybody. There is no problem in cornea or the pupil, everybody. Is this associated with restricted eye movements? Again, no, everybody. There is no muscular problem. There is nothing. No problem in the extraocular muscles. Can it be associated with amblyopia? Yes, it can be associated with amblyopia. But how and why? Let's see, everybody, moving forward. So, coloboma, eyelid coloboma can either be congenital, everybody, or it can be due to trauma. Usually it is congenital, that is what we say, everybody, or it can be due to trauma leading to a defect in the eyelid. If it is congenital, it is usually seen associated with Treacher-Collins syndrome. Okay, this is one shit we should remember. Often it is associated with cryptophthalmos. Some people call eyelid coloboma basically a type of cryptophthalmos only. So what is cryptophthalmos? Cryptophthalmos is when the eyelids are not able to form. So the epithelium of the skin covers the epithelium over the eye and over the cheek. So basically we are saying skin is continuing over the eye to the cheek and eyelids have not been able to form. That is what is cryptophthalmos. If I show you a photograph of a baby with cryptophthalmos, which is aborted cryptophthalmos, that means there is not complete cryptophthalmos. This is what the child will look like. Everybody, if we see in this photograph, we see that there is some kind of epithelium still trying to connect the upper eyelid skin to the cheek directly. The eyelids have not been able to separate completely. Yes. So this is an aborted cryptophthalmos with eyelid coloboma. In such a case, if I ask you what is the most common complication, we are able to see that due to the inseparated eyelids or the malformed eyelids and the epithelium over the eye, the visual axis is covered or blocked, everybody. So in such a case, we say that due to the blocking of the visual axis, everybody, the most common complication that the child may end up with is amblyopia due to blocked visual axis. So eyelid coloboma could have caused amblyopia as well as it could have led to exposure keratopathy. But based on the photograph that we have in the question, everybody, amblyopia cannot be the answer. The more likely answer is exposure keratopathy. If this was such an image, then the answer would have been amblyopia. I hope we are absolutely clear about this. Just to complete our topic, everybody, what are the other associated findings that could be seen in a case of, as we are discussing here, eyelid coloboma? First of all, it could have been associated with colobomas of other side, that is choroidal coloboma and iris coloboma. Iris coloboma is a very common condition. I hope all of us remember the photographs. If not, then see the photograph on the screen, everybody. So there is a notch in the iris, incomplete development of the iris. Iris coloboma is most common in which area, everybody? It is most common inferonasally, inferiorly and nasally. Then this is a photograph of choroidal coloboma. We see in the inferior part, the choroid has not formed. Because the choroid has not formed, I cannot see the fundal red reflex. Because of absence of choroid, I can straight away see the sclera, and sclera appears yellowish. So all this excavated part that looks like this is choroidal coloboma. Moving forward, we could have led to exposure keratopathy, as we have just understand. It could have led to symblepharon. What is symblepharon, everybody? Symblepharon is adhesion between tarsal conjunctiva or palpebral conjunctiva and bulbar conjunctiva. Trichiasis, obviously due to the malformed eyelid, the eyelashes, some of the eyelashes could have grown inwards, everybody. Anterior polar cataract and eyebrow defect. So these are some of the common associated findings with the case of eyelid coloboma. So that's our third question, everybody. I hope we are absolutely clear with this. The answer is exposure keratopathy. Moving on to our next question. Okay, probably one of the easy questions to be asked in your exam from ophthalmology, everybody. Question number 4. A 33-year-old woman presents with complaints of progressive loss of vision towards the right halves of both eyes. Where is the lesion in the optic pathway? As soon as I read this question, I know the answer. But if I don't, I want to go stepwise. So I draw both the visual fields. Okay. I could have just drawn it mentally, or I could have drawn it there. Now, this is my left visual field, this is my right visual field. This is the left side of my left visual field, this is the right side of my left visual field. This is the left side of my right visual field, this is the right side of my right visual field. I know there are lots of lefts and rights which I've just said, but I hope you understand what I've written here. Now the patient is saying that the patient cannot see towards the right halves of both the eyes. So that means from the left eye in the right side, from the right side in the right eye. So that means the patient is saying I cannot see towards the same side in both the eyes. When the patient cannot see towards the same side, everybody, if I show you an actual photograph, how it will look like this, everybody. If the patient cannot see towards the same side, everybody, in both the eyes, we call it which word, everybody? Homonymous. So basically we know that the patient is suffering from homonymous hemianopia. And this is which sided homonymous hemianopia, everybody? Right-sided homonymous hemianopia. Now, homonymous hemianopia occurs due to lesion. As again and again I've shouted and I've explained to everybody millions of times, lesion below the optic chiasma. First of all, and then the second clue is it is always contralateral. So if you remember the word contralateral, then the options would have been easy. If this is a right-sided homonymous hemianopia, then the lesion could have been on the left side, everybody. So let's see, everybody, our options here. Left side, everybody. So optic chiasma gets ruled out, right visual cortex gets ruled out, right optic nerve gets ruled out. As soon as I know that it is contralateral, I am left with only one option, everybody. And the option is left optic tract. Does it satisfy both our conditions? Yes, it is below the optic chiasma. And the patient has lost vision on the right side. The lesion is on the left side. The question is done and dusted, everybody. 10-second question, probably not more than that. Now, I know a lot of students were confused because the language is such that the patient says loss of vision towards the right halves of both eyes. So is the patient saying I cannot see towards the right eye from my retina? That means left eye in the visual field, all that. See, again, understand, this is a clinical question. The patient is coming into your OPD. The patient does not know that the eyes and the visual field are opposite to each other. If the patient is saying to you that I cannot see towards the right eye of both the eyes, that means the patient is talking about the visual field only. The patient will not say, sir, the right eye visual field, left eye retina, or blah, blah, blah. I hope you are getting it. Again, approach the question not theoretically. This is a history given, approach it clinically. If you go and say to a doctor, I cannot see towards the right side, you are talking about your visual field or about your retina. I hope you understand what I'm saying here. Yes? So the answer without doubt was left optic tract, everybody. Chalo, let's move on. If we want to revise everybody, this is our visual pathway. This is our retina divided into two parts, temporal fibers, nasal fibers. Optic nerve, optic chiasma, optic tract, lateral geniculate body, optic radiations and visual cortex. If we see the left optic tract lesion, everybody, in the left optic tract, which fibers are present, everybody? Same side temporal, that is left temporal, and opposite side nasal, that is right nasal, which lead to right homonymous hemianopia. Okay, everybody, done? Moving on to our next question, question number 5, everybody. This was probably one of those slightly tricky questions or controversial questions or a new question, so as to say. Not difficult. I'm not using the word difficult at all. Let's see, everybody. The first clue, the main clue given in the question is this: 15-year-old girl is not compliant. You are not able to adjust with spectacles for her myopic astigmatism. Myopic astigmatism means the patient or the child must have been wearing either compound or simple. So let's take a case of compound -2 DS and let's say had a high astigmatism -4 DC at 90 degree or something like that, everybody. So the child must have been wearing such a spectacle, everybody. What would be the appropriate management in her case? Now, the question could have been solved just by one word, that is 15. The age is 15 years. At 15 years of age, can we do LASIK? That is the question. No. Why can't we do LASIK? We know that the age has to be greater than 18 years. Now, we have read this, that age greater than 18 years, LASIK, that is a criteria for LASIK. But why is that the criteria? Have we ever wondered to think about it? So, we know that the shape and the size of the eye can change up to 18-20 years till your growth is happening. So, we know that your refractory error can change up to that age. For LASIK or any other surgery to do, we must be sure that our refractory error is constant. Why? Let's take an example. Let's say your number is -3 today. I do a LASIK. But your number is still not stable. After 1 year, your number increases to -3.5. I have done a LASIK to correct a -3 myopia. So you will land up with a residual -0.5 diopter myopia after 1 year. Why had you got LASIK done to not wear a spectacles? But now again, as a patient, think about it, you will have to wear a spectacle. So apart from age, always we say that refraction should be stable for 1 year. Both these go hand in hand if you understand. Yes. So at 15 years of age, I will not do LASIK. I will never do LASIK. Femto LASIK is just a variant of LASIK wherein we are making the flap not by a blade but by femto laser. So it is just LASIK, everybody, no difference. So both these options almost everybody was able to rule out, I hope. Now the confusion came between ICL and spherical equivalent spectacles. Both look like new names to everybody. That is why all of us got confused. So let's see, everybody, what is an ICL? So I hope you know. If you don't, then we are reading here. ICL is implantable columnar lens. Now, what is implantable columnar lens? So, in cases of high myopia, so we usually say greater than 8 diopter. Okay, everybody, 8, 9, 10, 12. When LASIK becomes contraindicated, why does LASIK become contraindicated in such cases, or why can it become contraindicated in such cases? Theoretically, we say LASIK can be done up to -13 diopter. But practically, before doing LASIK, we have to measure the corneal thickness. Okay? Corneal thickness should be more than 450 micron. Okay? For every 1 diopter, we have to ablate 10 micron of stroma. So I hope what you understand here is, for LASIK to do in such a high number, I have to ablate more cornea. So I make my cornea thinner. So depending on the pre-existing or the pre-surgical corneal thickness, based on the residual stroma thickness that will be left, I may or may not be able to progress with the surgery called LASIK in all cases of high myopia. It totally depends on what your pre-existing or pre-surgical corneal thickness is. Yes. So in such cases, greater than 8, 10, 12 diopter myopia, I may have to look at another option. And that option now everybody becomes ICL. If you hear what I'm saying, I am looking at ICL because I cannot do LASIK. When do I do LASIK, everybody? After 18 years of age. So when should I do ICL, or when am I thinking of ICL, everybody? Again, it is a clinical question. What we think of as clinicians. I am thinking about ICL only when the patient is greater than 18 years. What is implantable columnar lens? I implant over the normal crystalline lens. So this lens is implanted over a normal crystalline lens, everybody. So there is a vault. There is a convex shaped lens which is implanted over your normal crystalline lens of the power that is needed. And that is what is called as implantable columnar lens. This is not cataract surgery. We are not removing your lens and then implanting the IOL. We are just implanting a lens, everybody, over your normal lens. Am I making myself absolutely clear, everybody? Please understand that any surgery to correct the refractory error has to be done after 18 years of age, because we know that is the time when the patient will have what, everybody? Constancy, or can have constancy in the refractory error. That means we are left with only one option here, everybody. And what is that option, everybody? The option was spherical equivalent lens, spherical equivalent spectacles. So this is the correct answer. Now, what are spherical equivalent spectacles, everybody? Spherical equivalent is equal to sphere plus half cylinder. This is your spherical equivalent. So, given the option that I have, or given the example that I have, minus 2ds minus 4dc, if you ask me, sir, what is the spherical equivalent for this? The answer will be minus 4 diopter sphere. Am I making myself very clear, everybody? Now, why would the patient have not been able to adjust to these myopic astigmatic spectacles, everybody? Because a lot of times when the astigmatism is high, due to the axis, the principal meridians not being regular, it may have been irregular, the patient is not able to adjust because the power in one of the axes is too high, in the other axis is too low. So it becomes a little bit of difficulty. The patient has to train himself or herself to be able to see through that kind of a spectacle. So a lot of patients don't agree to this spectacle. So in that cases, we have to use a spherical equivalent, which compromises the vision in terms of 6x6, 6x9 a little bit, but it gives better compliancy with the spectacle. So though we know that the child will be able to wear the spectacles much more commonly, which will be more beneficial to the patient, everybody. So the answer to this question is spherical equivalent spectacles. We also use spherical equivalent as a concept when we have to advise contact lens, everybody. So if you have something which is called a compound myopic or a compound hypermetropic astigmatism, but a very small astigmatism, let's say you had -2 and -1. So let's say you had -2 diopter sphere with a -1 diopter cylinder. So what I would have done, I would have not asked you to get a toric contact lens. Instead, I would have asked you to wear a -2.5 diopter sphere contact lens. I hope you understand what I'm saying. So that is where the concept of spherical equivalent comes into effect, everybody. Am I absolutely clear? So the answer is spherical equivalent lens. As I said in the beginning, only by the age 15 years, we could have ruled out all the surgical options and given the answer as our best probable answer, even if we were not sure in the question, spherical equivalent spectacles. Let's move on to question number 6, everybody. An industrial worker was admitted to the hospital after injury to the eye while cutting stone with hammer and chisel. So the clue here is hammer and chisel, everybody. Foreign body was suspected to be impacted, everybody. So impacted foreign body. Which investigation can be detrimental in this patient, everybody? So first of all, everybody, if we have ever read about intraocular foreign bodies, we know that there is a iron foreign body, and all iron foreign bodies, MRI is contraindicated. So if we were thinking clearly, if we were thinking fast, everybody, if we were thinking subspinally, I can say we would have marked MRI. But if not, everybody, let us discuss in detail about foreign bodies, IOFB, intraocular foreign bodies, to be able to better understand this question and how we could have approached this question, everybody. So normally we say the site of IOFB entry, if the foreign body is intraocular, it is impacted, then there has to be a site of entry, everybody. The most common site of entry is cornea, because cornea is present anteriorly, that is the most portion of the eye which is visible to any, or which is, can be a site of entry. Then it can be sclera, then it can be limbus, in this order. Then if the foreign body has penetrated into the posterior segment, everybody, then what is the most likely location in the posterior segment? Intravitreal in almost 61% of the cases, followed by intraretinal, and lastly subretinal. Then what are the types of intraocular foreign bodies? Metallic foreign bodies are the most common, more than non-metallic, everybody. And amongst metallic, iron is the most common foreign body, followed by lead, everybody. So these are just some of the basic facts about IOFB. Now, we are talking about an iron foreign body here. Now, a lot of students are thinking that the patient given in the question was cutting stone. Stone means it could have been a chip of stone. But please understand, that's what we are trying to say, that the most common types of intraocular foreign bodies are metallic and iron. Because iron foreign bodies, even if they're small chips, they are sharp and they can penetrate. Stone-like foreign bodies, they will hit you, they will call you blunt trauma, and then they will fall out of the eye. They cannot go intraocular. We are talking about an impacted foreign body, not a blunt trauma. That's something which just came, hit your eye, and then went out, everybody, okay? Because of the rough edges, because of the speed, because of the shape, everybody, everything leads to stone not getting inside the eye, or stone foreign body particle not getting inside the eye. Iron particles, they do get inside the eye. They are the most common, again and again I am saying. Now, let's talk about siderosis. So what is siderosis, everybody? Siderosis is chronic. As we all know, it is a chronic disorder which will cause pigmentary degenerative changes. Why pigmentary? Because iron foreign body will release rust-colored pigment which will get deposited in all the epithelial structures like cornea, iris, trabecular meshwork, and everywhere, due to retention of iron containing foreign body, everybody. Yes. What is the most common mechanism? Please read here. That is the answer to the question. The most common mechanism is hammer and chisel. Now, again, we are thinking about stone foreign body. If it could have been an impaction by a stone foreign body, because this is a clinical question and because we are not used to attending our clinics a lot. Again and again, as we are saying that the examination will be more clinical. Clinical means it will test the fact whether you have actually seen patients or not during your MBBS, or whether your MBBS has only been a lot of theory books, everybody. So if we have encountered our patients of hammer and chisel injury, we know that there are minute specks of iron foreign body which impact either in the cornea, or they will go inside, impact in the iris, lens, or in the posterior segment. Please remember, the most common mechanism is hammer and chisel injury. That was the answer. If we just read till here, everybody, most common mechanism is hammer and chisel. Hammer and chisel injury leads to iron. Iron leads to MRI being contraindicated. But if we don't know that, let's move forward, everybody. So, siderosis can develop changes in the eye by two ways, everybody. One we call as direct siderosis. When there is direct siderosis due to the iron free particles combining with hydroxyl, there is hydroxyl free radical formation. Hydroxyl free radical formation leads to oxygen free radicals, which lead to glutamate reuptake being inhibited. When glutamate reuptake is inhibited, the glutamate levels are drastically increasing, which leads to opening of the ligand-gated calcium channels. And as soon as the ligand-gated calcium channels will open, all the calcium-dependent enzymes will activate, and this activation of calcium-dependent enzymes will lead to RPE and photoreceptor degeneration. Okay, so this is what direct siderosis is causing. So basically, what is getting affected, everybody? Outer retina due to direct siderosis. Okay, the mechanism is here. Now, there is another type of siderosis which we are calling as indirect siderosis. Indirect siderosis is destruction distal to the IOFB, everybody. Okay, wherever the IOFB is implanted or impacted, distal to that, we have the changes, everybody. This is due to involvement of retinal vasculature. Okay, so the iron particles, they have affinity to acid mucopolysaccharides. Due to that, they go into the retinal vasculature, and retinal vasculature means the branches or the capillaries of the central retinal artery. Central retinal artery supplies the inner 6 layers of the retina, and thus indirect siderosis affects the inner retinal layers. So always the first affected is the outer retinal layers, and after that the inner retinal layers in more chronic cases will get affected, everybody. So this is the basic fundamental of how siderosis occurs. Now, what will be the signs of siderosis, everybody? I'm not talking only about the posterior segment, everybody. Let's start from the front, everybody. There will be subconjunctival hemorrhage. It is trauma, everybody. There will be corneal edema if the site of impaction is cornea, or if the iron body or the foreign body has gone through the cornea, there will be corneal edema. There will be rust color deposit in the cornea, specifically if the foreign body is impacted in the corneal stroma or endothelium. So it will release some color and it will be rust colored ring, everybody, that we see. There will be iris discoloration if the foreign body has penetrated into the iris. Again, it will leach out the pigment and iris will be discolored. It will become greenish brown in color. There can be fixed dilated pupil, everybody. There can be secondary open angle glaucoma, again due to deposition of iron particles in trabecular meshwork, everybody. Again, trabecular meshwork blockage will lead to open angle glaucoma. There can be anterior subcapsular cataract if impacted into the lens. If the iron foreign body has penetrated the posterior segment, because the most common site of lodgement is vitreous, then the most common complication we see is vitreous hemorrhage followed by retinal detachment. So these are some of the important signs that we look for in a case of an impacted foreign body. Now coming to the most essential, how do we diagnose this, everybody? So first of all, let's get our mindset clear. If the foreign body can be seen onto the cornea, I will just simply remove it. Yes, on a slit lamp I will see and I will try to remove it if it is not impacted. If it is impacted, I will take it out and I will suture that part, whether it is the cornea or the sclera. We are using any diagnostic modality only because we are not able to see the foreign body simply on a slit lamp, everybody. That means there is some haziness in the anterior segment. We want to see where the foreign body is lodged in the posterior segment. Anterior segment, I will be able to see whether it is iris, whether it is cornea, whether it is lens. I hope you understand, right? So, first of all, can we do NCCT? Yes, NCCT is the gold standard for all metallic foreign bodies. It is the gold standard. So, this is the best investigation we should do. Can we do MRI? We should do MRI. MRI has better sensitivity. But the problem with MRI is it is good for non-metallic. In cases of ferromagnetic foreign bodies like iron, in this question, everybody, the iron foreign body will move along with the magnetic field of the MRI. So there are chances that the lodged foreign body may disturb the surrounding structures. So we always say MRI is contraindicated for a ferromagnetic foreign body like iron. Can we do ultrasound? Ultrasound can be done in both metallic and non-metallic, everybody. This is ideally the first investigation we go for when we are not sure of the foreign body, everybody, to be able to ascertain. Obviously, it has to be done with care because we are touching on the cornea. Yes, we have to not apply pressure. So this is dependent, operator dependent, everybody. Yes. So how good an operator can do a B scan, but this is not contraindicated. If you are thinking that if there is a foreign body in the cornea and when I do B scan, I will touch the cornea, so I will push it inside. Again, remember, we are doing it for visualizing the foreign body in the posterior segment. We are not doing it if I can see it with my own eyes. Lastly, if there are subclinical cases, we have been able to identify the foreign body, but there are no problems which are occurring of there is an encapsulated foreign body. We do not want to remove it due to some reason, everybody. Then we keep doing ERG, that is electroretinography, for monitoring it. If the electroretinography is stable, then we do not remove the foreign body. Otherwise, we have to explore. So if the foreign body is impacting in the optic nerve, if it is at a place where it is unapproachable, where we know that during the surgery, doing the surgery is difficult and it is a subclinical case, we tend not to remove the iron foreign body. Usually, as a rule, remove the foreign body as soon as possible unless there is some kind of contraindication to surgery, everybody. Yes. So I hope we have had a good recap on what siderosis is, what foreign body is, and the answer to our question very, very, very clearly, everybody, becomes MRI. Moving on to the 7th question, everybody. A 60-year-old patient, 60 year is the age given, with progressive painless loss of vision, that means gradual painless loss of vision, presents to the IOPD. The fundus picture is given below. What could be the probable finding? That means they're asking you the sign seen on the fundus image and the cause of it, right, guys? So based on the history given in the question, you cannot solve this question. So this is one of those questions where the history is given just to confuse you and make you rethink your answer. It is purely an image-based question. So basically seeing, there are 3 options here. One is soft exudate, one is hard exudate, and one is flame-shaped hemorrhage. Another option is soft exudate. So first of all, you want to find out whether is it a hemorrhage and exudate. Yes. So can it be a hemorrhage? I am asking you. Even with eyes closed, I can say this is not a hemorrhage. Hemorrhage means blood. It could have been a red colored thing. So if you don't know how a hemorrhage look like, everybody, flame shape, let's look at the photograph. So this is how a flame shaped hemorrhage should look like, everybody. So lots of flame shaped hemorrhages everywhere. Now, if you know what are flame shaped hemorrhages, then please know flame shaped hemorrhages are generally found in two conditions. One is diabetic retinopathy, and the other, where it gives the tomato ketchup appearance, is CRVO. I can better say ischemic CRVO, where we say we get the tomato ketchup or tomato splash appearance. So just by common sense, everybody, we can rule out one option, everybody. That is flame-shaped hemorrhages in the question. Flame-shaped hemorrhages can be seen and the cause is written, everybody. Going back to the question, everybody. So now we are left between two options. Either it can be a soft exudate or a hard exudate. Now, soft exudate, we do not call soft exudates these days. Soft exudates are basically the same thing what are cotton wool spots. I've written CWS. And hard exudates are basically what are exudates. Now, if we had read about it, then it would have been an easy question. If not, everybody, let's see what is the difference between a soft exudate or a cotton wool spot and a hard exudate or an exudate, everybody. So on the screen, we have two images, everybody. Yes, the image on the left side. Image on the left side shows yellowish colored deposits which are large and I can say fluffy in appearance. Large and fluffy in appearance. Lots of them you can see, everybody. Yes. Whereas the image on the right side, everybody, what does this show? This shows deposits of yellowish color, but which are very small and which have very crenated edges. So I'm saying small crenated edges, or I'm saying large fluffy. Now, as soon as we hear this, as soon as we say this large and fluffy should be what, everybody? It should be a cotton wool spot. I hope there is no confusion in this. Or I will say this is a soft exudate. Whereas if it is small crenated edges, we will call it exudates, or what is asked in the question as hard exudates. Am I absolutely clear, everybody? Now, what is the pathological difference between both, everybody? So hard exudates, everybody, or exudates as we are calling them, they are lipid deposits. Whereas cotton wool spots, everybody, these are deposits of neuronal debris. Deposits of neuronal debris. This is found in nerve fiber layer, whereas this is found in outer plexiform layer. Am I absolutely clear about this, everybody? So now once we understand the photographs, the answer has to be hard exudates. There is only one option given as hard exudates. So the correct answer for all of us becomes, everybody, hard exudates which are seen in diabetes. Am I absolutely correct here? Soft exudates can be seen in hypertension. They can be seen in diabetes mellitus. These are the two common conditions that we encounter soft exudates in. CRV or soft exudates you usually cannot see. So this option becomes wrong just because of the basic that the soft exudates cannot be found in CRVO. Either we find macular edema or we find some severe hemorrhages which obscure every other sign visible in ischemic CRVO. I hope we are very clear about this simple image-based question on fundus. Moving on, everybody, question number 8. Probably this was the easiest question from ophthalmology, everybody. I know I probably speak this for every question, but yes, this was actually one of the easiest questions. There are so many clues in this. First of all, 7-year-old boy. So we are talking about a child, everybody. White pupillary reflex. As soon as you write white pupillary reflex, you know it is a case of leukocoria. Now start thinking about the causes of leukocoria, for which enucleation was done. The third clue is that the surgery which was done was enucleation. The histopathological examination showed Flexner-Winter-Steiner rosettes. Now the answer has been given to you, served on a platter, as soon as if they have written Flexner-Winter-Steiner rosettes. If you did not know what are Flexner-Winter-Steiner rosettes, that means you just had not read this topic at all, everybody. Otherwise, there was no reason that you could have got this wrong, everybody. I hope there are enough clues, everybody. Leukocoria, enucleation done, 7-year-old child. The answer had to be what, everybody? Retinoblastoma. There could not have been any confusion. You don't need to rule out. You don't need to think. It's as simple as that. Now, if you don't know the Flexner-Winter-Steiner rosettes or leukocoria, let's just revise, everybody. So leukocoria is white pupillary reflex. As we can see in the right eye of this child, everybody, there is white pupillary reflex, so we can call it leukocoria. Now, I hope we are good enough to remember that unilateral leukocoria is most commonly due to retinoblastoma, whereas bilateral leukocoria is most commonly seen due to congenital cataract. If you're talking about children here, everybody. Yes. Now, what are these, everybody? These are Flexner Wintersteiner rosettes. So if tomorrow in another exam they want to ask you the same question but based on an image, this is the image, this is the kind of image, everybody. Rosettes means rose petal like configuration of tumor cells, everybody. So if we see all these are tumor cells, everybody. Yes. So these tumor cells are arranged like the rose petals, leaving a central empty lumen. That is the key, everybody. Central empty lumen. Okay. And surrounded by tumor cells. Now, why are these rosettes called as Flexner Wintersteiner rosettes? If you are interested in knowing this, everybody, they were discovered for the first time by two doctors, everybody. Simon Flexner and Hugo Wintersteiner, everybody. So based on the names of the doctors or the scientists who discovered it or the pathologists, everybody, they are known as Flexner Wintersteiner rosettes. Now, if we know retinoblastoma, there is another type of rosettes which are found, which are called as Homer Wright rosettes. How are they different from Flexner Wintersteiner rosettes? Let's see, everybody. So this is an image of Homer Wright rosettes. So let me just write down, this is an image of Homer Wright rosettes. So again, rosettes means something which appears like the petals of a flower. So we see here in this circle that a lot of tumor cells are surrounding an area, but this is not empty. That's the important point. This central lumen, everybody, if you see the diagrammatic representation, this is not empty. This is filled with pale neuropil. What is neuropil, everybody? It is a felt work of interwoven cytoplasmic processes, everybody. Yes. So the center is not empty like in cases of Flexner Wintersteiner rosettes, and they are known as Homer Wright rosettes. Homer Wright rosettes can also be seen in tumors like neuroblastoma and medulloepithelioma. Okay, guys, absolutely crystal clear question. As I said, there could not be any doubt in this question. So moving on to the next question, everybody. Question number 9 that was asked in ophthalmology. Everybody, again, this is a question which was kind of, we can say, touching anatomy as well as ophthalmology. A patient presented with vision loss. Okay, on radiological investigation, an aneurysm was noted which was damaging the optic chiasma. So as soon as I hear these two words, everybody, I am reminded of optic chiasma. Optic chiasma means, everybody, that we are talking about bitemporal hemianopia. Now, when I read about optic chiasma or bitemporal hemianopia, I remember a mnemonic. The mnemonic we have been taught, everybody, in ophthalmology. What are the causes of bitemporal hemianopia? The mnemonic is 3PC and AC. So everybody, I straight away go to the point of interest here. A for, we should remember in this mnemonic, anterior communicating artery aneurysm. So if we remembered this mnemonic, then I hope this should have been again a 10-second question, everybody. Let us just revise the other causes here. 3 for third ventricular glioma. P for, everybody, pituitary adenoma. Right? Then C for, everybody, craniopharyngioma. A, the question that has been asked, and C for cavernous sinus thrombosis. These are the 5 important causes of bitemporal hemianopia or lesion on the optic chiasma. So either you could have remembered this anatomical fact straight away from anatomy, or through this mnemonic also, it would have been very easy to solve this question, everybody. I hope there is no confusion at all in this question. The answer is anterior communicating artery. Moving on, everybody. Question number 10, everybody. Again, a question on the basic sciences of ophthalmology, everybody. So biochemistry based question, everybody. The question was, which of the following GAGs, that is glycosaminoglycans, everybody, are responsible for corneal transparency? Now, if the question was asking which of these are responsible, then keratin sulfate also leads to corneal transparency or contributes to corneal transparency, and chondroitin sulfate also contributes to corneal transparency. So if this is a multiple choice correct question, then there would have been 2 answers. But we had single choice correct options. then the answer will be keratin sulfate. Why it will be keratin sulfate? Because we know that the most common GAG in the corneal stroma is what, everybody? Keratin sulfate. So even though chondroitin sulfate, also known as dermatin sulfate, may contribute to corneal transparency, but just because of the sheer volume or the maximum concentration of keratin sulfate, the maximum responsibility lies with keratin sulfate, everybody. And that is the answer. We should also remember what is the most common type of collagen in corneal stroma. Again, easy question, everybody. Type 1. Okay. So just from our simple notes, if we remembered keratin sulfate as being present in corneal stroma, we could have answered this question if we had not read it directly, everybody. Yes, hyaluronic acid, everybody, is present in vitreous. If we are talking about the eye, hyaluronic acid is present in vitreous, everybody. Yes, done. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following can be prescribed in case of open angle glaucoma with bronchial asthma? No. This may seem like an easy question, but it was actually easier than it seems. Why, everybody? You didn't even need to read with bronchial asthma. The question could just have been solved on the fact that they're asking a treatment of open angle glaucoma. Why? Let's see, everybody. Latanoprost, drug of choice, PGF2 alpha analog. All of us know that this is the drug of choice for open angle glaucoma. All the other options, everybody, carboprost, gemiprost, and L-prostadil. These are what, everybody? These are prostaglandin E analogs. E1 and E2, everybody. Are prostaglandin E analogs used in the treatment of open angle glaucoma? No, everybody. If we just know the drugs, everybody, what are the drugs? First of all, PGF2 alpha analogs. Then we have beta blockers. Then we have alpha agonists. And then the last group is carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. These are the 4 main groups, everybody. There is no mention of prostaglandin E. All of us do read anti-glaucoma drugs. That's why I'm saying this is probably easier than it seemed, everybody. Probably the twist could have been if the options were formed more smartly, if there was given timolol, everybody. So timolol, being a beta blocker, would not have been given in bronchial asthma, everybody, because the beta blockers lead to bronchospasm, everybody. But based on the options that were given, everybody, in the question, it was a question which should not have taken you more than a second. Just read the option answer, latanoprost, nothing else in this question. Now, latanoprost being the drug of choice, we should know a little bit about it. So let's see, everybody, what is the mechanism of action of prostaglandin F2 alpha analogs like latanoprost, bimatoprost, or travoprost. They increase the uveoscleral outflow, everybody. How do they do that? They do that by relaxing the ciliary smooth muscles. F2 or FP receptors are present there, everybody. They make some cytoskeletal alterations and they remodel the extracellular matrix by increasing the matrix metalloproteinases. So there are 3 postulated mechanisms, everybody, and you should remember that all of them ultimately lead to increased uveoscleral outflow. Now, what are the important ocular side effects? I hope all of us remember this by heart. Number 1, hypertrichosis. Hypertrichosis for the latanoprost side effect means the eyelashes will become longer. Hyperpigmentation of the iris, which will lead to different colored iris if you are putting latanoprost only in one eye, heterochromia iridis. Uveitis, that is inflammation, macular edema, everybody, iris cysts, and reactivation of herpetic keratitis. So you will see a lot of questions are asked on these 2 points, uveitis and macular edema. So they will give you a question that a patient already has uveitis and he develops increased intraocular pressure. Which of the following anti-glaucoma drugs should be avoided, everybody? So latanoprost causes inflammation, so we cannot give it in a patient who is already having inflammation. I hope we understand this. I hope we learn this. So these are all very, very, very important topics that were asked. A lot of common topics, and as I said in the beginning of this discussion, everybody, a lot of the questions were simple. They were asking you the basics, everybody, and that is what the exams going forward are going to be. They are going to be easy but yet difficult. Easy because they will ask you the basics, and difficult because they will at the same time ask you clinical questions. Clinical questions do not mean out of the world questions. Clinical questions means just questions which test whether you have ever stepped a foot in your OPDs or not, whether you have taken case histories or not, whether you know what kind of presentation, what a case will give, everybody. So that is what we at last are going to become, everybody, doctors. Yes. So we need to get into this habit rather than just being bookworms. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. You read 10 hours a day, but you do that 2 hours of your clinical postings also, everybody. Yes. That's it with our NEET PG recall. So moving on to the INI-CET July 2021 recall, everybody. There were 6 questions asked from ophthalmology which is usually the trend in AIMS or INI set. 6 to 8 questions are asked, everybody. The distribution was as follows. A single question was asked from 6 topics, everybody. Retina almost always asked in AIMS. Neuro-ophthalmology, yes, sometimes, no, sometimes. Conjunctiva, easy question, almost always asked again. Glaucoma, again, almost always asked. Squint is one of the favorite topics of INI set or AIMS examiners. For the past 3 to 4 years, we are seeing that every examination, that means almost the past 7 to 8 attempts, squint questions are coming. And one question was from lacrimal apparatus. Now, as we will see that if we had done the INI set questions, everybody, we would see similar topics have been asked in NEET. Further perpetuating our point that the topics remain the same, the trends remain the same, just the questions differ. So again, it is important to do the revisions of the previous 5 to 6 years of questions of both NEET as well as AIMS or INI set or PGI as they were earlier, everybody, to be able to gauge the topics that are being asked. Because again, there are only a certain number of topics which are asked. Apart from 1 or 2 ectopic questions in each examination, the topics usually remain the same. Let's see, everybody, the first question that was asked in INI set July 2021 attempt here. A 30-year-old female presents with redness and pain. Presents with redness and pain in the eye. Examination revealed an IOP of 38 mm. Aqueous flare. As soon as you hear the word flare, everybody, you should be thinking about a single diagnosis. And corneal precipitates. Corneal precipitates, if I call them keratic precipitates, everybody, they mean the same thing, everybody. So as soon as I hear keratic precipitates and I hear flare, I think of uveitis. Uveitis means inflammation. Inflammation will lead to redness. Inflammation will lead to pain. Due to inflammation in acute cases, the IOP may be raised, everybody. So beyond doubt, I am absolutely clear that in the question, the diagnosis is anterior uveitis. Yes. Now the question is, which of the following drugs must be avoided? So the last question that we have just discussed as part of the NEET PG recall, everybody, we had discussed the side effects of latanoprost, prostaglandin F2 analogs. I had explained that one of the major important side effects is uveitis. We need to remember this, everybody. So we know that prostaglandin F2 analogs cause uveitis or cause inflammation as a side effect. So can we give latanoprost in a patient who is already suffering from uveitis, everybody? No. So the answer becomes absolutely clear here that the answer has to be prostaglandin analogs, or if the names of the drugs were given, we would have said latanoprost. I hope we are absolutely clear here in this question. Yes? What are the important side effects of beta blockers, everybody? Beta blockers cause blepharoconjunctivitis. They can cause corneal anesthesia. They can cause nasolacrimal duct blockage. Yes? Mannitol, everybody, mannitol is almost an emergency drug. We do not keep on using it over and over again. So side effects do not matter a lot, everybody. Carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, again, they are almost used as acetazolamide, for example. They are almost used as emergency drugs. So again, the ocular side effects do not matter here, everybody. So I hope this was an easy question. We had just done the past question. So you see the similarity of topics, everybody, between both the examinations again here. As I said previously, anti-glaucoma drugs are a very important group of topics and their side effects, everybody. Moving on to the next question, everybody. Question number 2, which was asked in INI set. Identify the site of lesion, everybody. So the image was given and you were asked to identify the site of lesion. So first of all, let's see what is the visual field effect. So we see there is hemianopia, yes, in the left visual field, but with central vision sparing. Similarly, there is hemianopia in the right visual field, again with macular sparing. So can I say this is right-sided? Homonymous hemianopia with macular sparing. Now again, everybody, I will just discuss the same 2 points that I had discussed previously as part of a NEET PG recall question. See again the similarity on the topics, everybody. That below the optic chiasma, what occurs is homonymous visual field effects. That is the first clue here, everybody. The second clue is homonymous is always contralateral. So first of all, below the optic chiasma, everybody, based on below the optic chiasma, I can rule out optic chiasma. Optic chiasma would have led to bitemporal hemianopia, as simple as that, everybody. Yes. Now they have to be contralateral. Contralateral means it is right-sided homonymous hemianopia. That means the lesion had to be in which side, everybody? Left side. So I search for a left in the option. There are two lefts, everybody. Left occipital, left geniculate. So I rule out right occipital lobe. Now macular sparing, everybody. If we remember, occipital lobe can present in two ways, everybody. Either with macular sparing or with macular defect. We know it has to be a lesion of the occipital lobe, everybody. So the answer has to be left occipital lobe. Left geniculate body would have caused a complete homonymous hemianopia, not with macular sparing, everybody. So that is the answer to this question. Again, I hope a very simple direct question. All you had to look for in this question was whether it was macular sparing or not, everybody. And it is clearly evident on the given photograph that it is a case of macular sparing. I hope you do remember that the occipital lobe can present in two ways, everybody. The two ways are either the tip of the cortex, which is supplied by the middle cerebral artery, everybody. This can be damaged. If only the tip is damaged, we always remember tip is equal to macula. So the answer would have been what, everybody? Contralateral homonymous macular defects. Only macular defect. But if there is a PCA lesion, everybody, then it will be what has been given to us: contralateral homonymous hemianopia with macular sparing. So because of this peculiar blood supply of the occipital lobe, we can get two lesions, everybody. And because of the macular fibers getting represented on the tip of the macula, we get such a differentiation, everybody. I hope all of us are absolutely clear about this. Again, this pertains to the same question that was asked in NEET PG, where instead of the image, they had said that the patient complains of loss of vision on the right side in both the eyes, everybody. Without macular sparing, they had given the same question almost. Yes, sirs, everybody? Yes. Move on to the next question. Question number 3, everybody. So again, everybody, if you see the topic sounds similar: retinoblastoma. We had just seen another question being asked in the NEET PG on retinoblastoma. This was an easier question. What is the most common route of spread of retinoblastoma? There are only 3 routes of spread, everybody. Either it can be hematogenous by blood, lymphatic by lymph, or direct. And what is the answer in retinoblastoma? Simple fact-based question. Direct invasion, everybody. Yes. So we know this, but direct invasion most commonly occurs through optic nerve, or it can occur through sclera, direct extension from scleral tissue or from optic nerve. Yes. Now there was a variation. Some of the students told us as a recall that instead of the most common, the word asked in the question was most characteristic. So if most characteristic was asked, everybody, then there is no direct source or there is no direct author or book which writes a characteristic source of spread or route of spread of retinoblastoma. But had the question been asked characteristic, then I would have leaned towards the answer on optic nerve invasion, everybody. Because direct invasion is a route of spread, which most commonly occurs through optic nerve. So characteristically, we are saying as a characteristic of the tumor, it is spreading through my optic nerve. So I am not sure whether most characteristic was asked or most common was asked. More chances are that they would have asked most common, but if in a case most characteristic was asked, if this question gets repeated, then the answer has to be optic nerve invasion. Yes. Apart from this, we have already seen previously Flexner, Wintersteiner rosettes and Homer Wright rosettes. They are two important histopathological findings seen in the case of retinoblastoma. We know that retinoblastoma, everybody, is inherited autosomal dominant. We know there is a hypothesis called Knudson's 2-hit hypothesis. We have seen previously leukocoria, everybody, as the most common presenting sign. We know, again, we have seen previously that enucleation is the treatment. We know that if not enucleation, we can give chemotherapy in the form of 3 drugs, CEV, carboplatin, etoposide, vincristine. So all these are simple, important questions from retinoblastoma. Retinoblastoma is probably the only tumor-based question or topic that can be asked from ophthalmology. That is why it is again and again often asked. If you go through the previous 10 or 15 years questions, you will see almost every other year retinoblastoma questions are there. So the frequency is very high. So that is one topic we cannot miss to study, everybody. Okay. Moving on to the next question, everybody. Question number 4. Again, a simple fact-based question. So if we see the trend was being set by INICT in simple questions, everybody, the most common tumor of lacrimal gland is. So again, the language is important. The most common tumor. There can only be 2 questions like this. Everybody, this is a repeated question, has been asked lots of times. The answer is pleomorphic adenoma. Had they asked the most common malignancy or malignant tumor, everybody, then the answer would have been adenocystic carcinoma. Okay, again and again repeated this question, everybody. I hope there is no confusion about this. Now, if it is a lacrimal gland tumor, everybody, lacrimal gland is present where? Lacrimal gland is present supratemporally. So all the tumors push the eyeball down and in, everybody. So what do we see? We see inferonasal displacement or pushing of the eye. Okay, so please remember, if a photograph comes, if the eye is displaced down and in, everybody, it is indicating a lacrimal gland tumor, everybody. Okay, moving on to the next question. Again, a simple fact-based question, everybody. I know INICT questions were simpler than NEET PG questions, it seems, from ophthalmology at least. Safe strategy for trachoma includes all except. So we have been reading safe strategy for a long time now. They had asked just the full form of safe. S for surgery, A for antibiotics, F for facial cleanliness, E for evaluation of control program. No. E for what, everybody? Environmental hygiene. So if you don't remember this photograph, please remember this. Surgery for inturned eyelids, everybody. Because of the cicatrization, everybody, scarring happening in the lids, the eyelid tissue is contracted. That is why the eyelid margin gets pulled, and due to that there is inward turning of eyelashes, everybody. So when there is inward turning of eyelashes, I hope you understand what I am trying to draw. Instead of outward, the eyelashes grow inward, everybody. They rub onto the cornea. When they rub onto the cornea, they cause corneal opacity. So the complication, everybody, we say for trachoma is corneal opacity. And when there is corneal opacity, we say there will be a scar. So trachoma can cause blindness due to this. Otherwise, trachoma is a conjunctival problem. The conjunctiva does not contribute in vision, but still it can cause blindness due to this issue. That is why we say surgery is needed for inward inturned eyelids, everybody. Antibiotics obviously need to be given because the infection is due to chlamydia trachomatis, everybody. The drug of choice is azithromycin 1 gram single dose. Facial cleanliness to prevent disease transmission. The disease transmission is via FFF, finger fly fomite. And environmental change or environmental hygiene to increase access to water and sanitation to be able to clean the eyes, everybody, to clean the discharge, everybody, which leads to the spread of the trachoma infection. I hope all of us remember this. Trachoma is the single most important condition in conjunctiva. I always say, everybody, if we don't remember the clinical important features, let's see, everybody. So this is what, everybody, this is line of cicatrization. Line of cicatrization is Arlt's line, seen between the upper 1/3 and the lower 2/3, because the eyelid is everted. That is why this becomes the upper 1/3. This becomes the lower 2/3, everybody. Then we see some kind of pits, everybody. I hope we are able to see here. Yes, pits. This is another pit. This is another pit. These pits are seen at limbus. They represent follicles which were previously present and now they have been absorbed, everybody. So this sign is characteristic and known as Herbert pits, everybody. This is, as you can see, the cornea has become vascularized. Cornea is an avascular structure. So this sign is known as pannus. Apart from this, again, we remember the important diagnostic sign as Sago-Grain follicle. So trachoma is causing mainly follicular conjunctivitis, though some papilla may also be seen, everybody. So these are the important characteristic features of trachoma. I hope all of us remember, along with the question on safe strategy, the drug of choice, and everything else, everybody. Yes, moving on. Last question, everybody. Identify the lesion. So this was a squint-based question, and as I have seen, usually these are the questions where the students overthink, everybody. They overthink because they have read squint, but they have not seen a lot of photographs. Again, clinical, everybody. If we have gone to clinics, such questions become easy. This was actually an easy question if we didn't overthink. So the question was simply identify the lesion. So whenever we are talking about identifying the lesion in the photograph, so let us see the photograph in a little enlarged format, everybody. Let's first look at the primary gaze. Let's first look at, everybody, the primary gaze. Okay. In the primary gaze, we see that the right eye seems normal, but the left eye, what can we see, everybody? I have marked it in red, everybody. We can see definitely ptosis. If we look carefully, the eye is not straight, everybody. The eye is out definitely and maybe slightly down. Maybe, okay. But we know for sure two things, ptosis and out eye. As soon as I hear ptosis, everybody, I could have solved the question then and there. Based on the options, everybody, ptosis is LPS muscle. LPS muscle is supplied by third nerve. So just based on the primary gaze, I could have given the answer as oculomotor nerve palsy. But what if we were not sure about the answer, we wanted to confirm? We could even have confirmed, everybody. So let's see the other gazes, everybody. So now if we look at this gaze, everybody, this is which gaze, everybody? Both the eyeballs looking towards the right side. So this is dextroversion. Okay. Now, in dextroversion, we know that the left eye needs to do what, everybody? Adduction. So can the left eye move inwards? Left eye is not able to move inwards. That means left eye adduction is absent, everybody. That means left medial rectus is paralyzed, everybody. But is it medial rectus palsy? Let us see, everybody. So let us see the top row. In all the three gazes, everybody, whether the patient is trying to look straight up, whether it is dextro elevation or whether it is levo elevation, the left eye should have elevated. But as we see in the straight up, everybody, circumversion, the left eye is unable to elevate. Similarly, here, everybody, in dextroversion, left eye is unable to elevate. Here also the left eye is unable to elevate. So we say, based on this, we know there is loss of elevation. And based on the blue color, we know there is loss of adduction. Now, loss of adduction, as we just said, means MR palsy. Loss of elevation means superior rectus palsy and inferior oblique palsy. Ptosis means LPS palsy. So based on all these, everybody, are we in any kind of doubt whatsoever that it is not a case of oculomotor nerve palsy? I hope all of you are clear as to what I'm trying to say here, everybody. Okay. So just don't overthink in such questions. Don't try to take out diagnoses which are less common, everybody. So a lot of students told us that it was medial rectus palsy. Why was it medial rectus palsy? When ptosis is seen, how can it be medial rectus palsy? Ptosis means that apart from medial rectus, some other muscle had to be involved. That means oculomotor nerve, which at last is the nerve supply of medial rectus, also is involved. So the better answer, the definite answer here was oculomotor nerve palsy. If you want to revise, everybody, LPS palsy leads to ptosis, we have just seen. Superior rectus, inferior oblique, both elevators paralyzed, which leads to down eye. Medial rectus paralyzed, so adduction is absent, which leads to out eye. Sphincter pupillae is also supplied by oculomotor nerve, so meiosis will not be able to occur, mydriasis will occur. Please remember that all the clinical features of third cranial nerve palsy are seen except pupillary sparing, or we say pupilla is spared except mydriasis in vascular conditions like diabetes, right? Then ciliary muscle is also paralyzed, leading to loss of accommodation. So this is a group of symptoms or signs, everybody, of a case of oculomotor nerve palsy. Had it been medial rectus palsy, everybody, had it been medial rectus palsy, there would not have been ptosis. There would have been no loss of elevation. Okay. So if it was a pure MR palsy only. Trochlear nerve palsy, SO4, LR6. In SO4, we would have seen hypertropia. So if we just remember the simple keys, everybody, abducens, LR6. LR6, we see what, everybody? Esotropia. Okay. So based on just this simple fundamental, just looking at the photograph, I know all of us know the theory about this. The problem is just in looking at the photograph. So again, I say don't overthink, everybody. So this was all about the questions of INI set, everybody. With this, we are done with our recall session. As we would have seen, everybody, what is the take home, everybody? As we would have seen that the questions being asked are straightforward, but with a clinical twist. When I say clinical twist, I don't mean out of the world question. I just mean questions which depend, again, everybody, on whether we have seen cases or not, whether we have a clinical bent of mind or not, whether we can hear the patient when we are reading the question or not. The patient is complaining of redness and pain. Can we think about the differential diagnosis there? Then it is written there is aqueous flare. Can we think about the diagnosis here? So it's all about forming the differential diagnosis and then arriving at the first differential diagnosis is the best answer, everybody. Yes. So again, I say, please, moving forward, do revise your previous year questions. Moving forward, don't be disheartened if you are not able to perform to your best of abilities in the INI set or in the NEET, everybody. Always remember, you are one of the brightest minds. That is why you are in MBBS. Getting into MBBS itself is not a very easy job. So now you are amongst those elite and you just want to work a little more harder to be able to reach your aim. Never dream, everybody. If you have watched a new series called Kota Factory, Jitu Bhaiya there says, dreams are not fulfilled. वो आप रात को देखते हो, those are dreams. Aims are what you have to achieve. So don't dream, everybody. Aim for aims, aim for INI set, aim for NEET PG. Work hard towards it. Each day move forward and you shall achieve it, everybody. Thank you, everybody.